Hello, hello, hello. I should be on right now, if that makes sense. I don't know why I said that. Okay. Just figuring out some last minute configurations, if you could call it that. Oh shit. Oh boy. Not gonna lie, a little nervous. Alright, so far it seems like the stream is healthy for the most part. A little bumpy, but that's fine. Okay. Just wanted to make sure the mic was working. But, hello, everybody. I'm back to stream again. I didn't take as long of a break as I thought I would. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but, you know, I didn't expect to be coming back this soon after playing, Deltarune. But, yeah. So, before we get started on anything else, you may be wondering what game I'm playing. Well, let me first start off by saying it's an indie game. It's purely indie game. It's not a, mainstream or AAA or anything. So that's why you've probably never heard of it before. 2, it's a visual novel-esque, if I can describe it as such. But, basically, the visual novel genre overall is not what I would say a very good, streaming thing, but I like visual novels. I love them. But, the reason why I'm streaming this one is because this is a kind of a special, I guess you could say, thing. But, yeah, keeping those two things in mind, let me show off the game right here. Alright, so this is... Oh, forgot the text. I'm sorry. So this is a game called Carmilla. How should I describe it? Well, Carmilla, this is a visual novel that is, I don't want to say based off of, because that kind of implies that it's like, oh, there's going to be some different elements. I don't know. It's basically a visual novel, I guess retelling is the best word to describe this. Is a visual novel that is a retelling of an old novel I believe was published in the 1890s, I want to say, off of the book by the same name, Carmilla. I don't know much about it because I've never read it. Hell, I didn't even know it existed until almost a month ago. But basically, Carmilla, to, I guess you could say, a lot of vampire enthusiasts, is probably the first true vampire story, famous, I think, because this came out before Dracula. And it was and it's different in that I don't I'm sorry, I'm just like thinking how to describe this. But basically, Carmilla was different in that not only was it probably a book of its time, because it featured, you know, vampires and all that, it was also different in that both the protagonist, well, I guess it's not that different. The vampire in this story is a woman, female, and Carmilla is kind of like telling the story of these two women or girls, I don't know how old they are, kind of finding each other, and I'm just gonna call it what it is, lesbian vampire story. Carmilla is apparently known as that, and that's what drew me to it. I mean, it's like, it's a very weird sentence to say, but you know what? I like it. It's kind of what draws me in. But other than that, I don't know much. But other than that, I don't know what Carmilla entails, or, you know, like, I don't know much about it. I never read it. This is my first time actually reading it through a visual novel form. But But yeah, this is going to be an interesting ride. Alright, let's just get the credits out of the way first. This is just, you can take a look at this and be like, who are the people that made this? So I wanted to, I do have the link of this game in the description. But I'm gonna say it here anyway. Because this game is an indie game, if you want to support the game or its creators, go to visualgothic.itch.io. Is there a .com? I don't remember. /Carmilla. This game is completely free, by the way. You can just download it, but there is an option to tip the creators. So if you want to support them, go to that link in the description. You know, it's not like triple. I mean, I just thought, you know, to give the creators a little bit of a shout out. Also, before we get started on this, I'm probably gonna be a little bit quieter than I usually am in these streams because people are over and I don't tend to do very well with an audience. I mean, it's different with YouTube, but I'm just hoping that I don't have internet problems. I hope to God not. But hopefully you enjoy this stream regardless. I don't know whether or not I'm gonna be able to finish this game during this stream. There, on the games page, there is actually a time that said like 5 hours, but I'm like, with the way I read, it's gonna take like 10 hours, and I don't want to stream for too long, so yeah. Anyway, alright, these are the controls. I just want to make sure I got everything right. I'm playing mostly this on a mouse because I don't want to use the keyboard. But alright, so supposedly this has 5 chapters along with an editor's preface. So let's get started. Alright, editor's introduction. Visual, adjective. Attained or maintained by sight, visual impressions. Producing mental images, vivid. Gothic, adjective, pejorative? I've never seen that word before in my life. barbaric, lacking refined taste, the vulgar. Okay. Ada. The first time I met Dr. Martin Heslius was in exile, although his was a self-imposed one. Okay, I'm just gonna keep the mouse down there. A practicing surgeon at the time, he was dissatisfied with the materialistic worldview governing his profession, and therefore decided to take an indefinite break. Music's a little bit loud for me. I, on the other hand, had recently been expelled from the convent of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, and thus forced to abandon my novitiate. Novitiate? Okay, so Ada was a nun, if I read convent correctly. Although, I must admit, the punishment was an appropriate one. It meant that I lost not only my home, but also my calling. I haven't been quite focused ever since, and never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks. In the doctor, I found my master. We quickly bonded over our shared interests in the metaphysical and the works of Swedenborg. His knowledge was immense, his grasp of difficult ideas immensely intuitive. He was the very man to inspire a young enthusiast like me with awe and delight. My admiration has stood the test of time and separation of space. I'm sure it is well founded. After returning to his profession, I'm never going to pronounce this name right, I have a feeling. Heselius made it a point to seek out those cases which showed the least likelihood of rewarding inquiry, in the hopes of furthering his theories about the relationship between the natural and the spiritual world. Often during his investigations, he would come across cases that seemed to scratch at the cloudy glass separating the two worlds. His artful documentation of these cases would be forwarded to me, so I could translate and edit them for presentation to an interested laity. Thus, Visual Gothic was born. It is named after the duality that is inherent in the two definitions of visual cited earlier, namely sensory perception and imagination, or the tangible and the intangible. Gothic, to us, stands for a shameless artistic freedom that disregards historical accuracy, established standards, or, God beware, refined taste in favor of affect. I have appended a small collection of notes that might provide further information on a variety of terms and subjects. Oh dear. Oh no. Oh my god, what is this? Oh, I'm gonna have to read all this, aren't I? Okay. Oh dear. Oh god. Encoding overload. I'm barely streaming. Alright, I think just to keep the game moving, I won't pay much attention to this. Which sucks. But it's fine. You can right-click the mouse or... Sorry about that, I thought I heard noise. You can right-click the mouse or hit the escape button at any time for help and further options. Okay. Okay. That's good. The manuscripts, which are forwarded to me by Dr. Heselius, are written, some in English, some in French, but the greater part in German. Please tell me it's translated. I am a faithful, though by no means a graceful translator, and although here and there I omit some passages, shorten others, and disguise names, I have interpolated nothing. The first case we shall present to you is not without educational merits. Although not Gothic in its strictest sense, it presents a fine starting point for further exploration of the genre. The story may serve as a warning, not against the dangers of unrestrained flights of fancy, but against blind rationalism. The manuscript came with the following note attached to it. Dear Ada, as I forward this case to you, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it in nothing. I have therefore determined to abstain from any of my usual reasoning. Suffice to say that I believe the attached manuscript, which has its foundation in truth and nature, involves some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence and its intermediates. Your humble servant, Martin Hesselius. Since Dr. Hesselius is withholding his usual reasoning, allow me to introduce Laura, the protagonist and narrator of our first case. She's cute. Laura is undoubtedly an intelligent lady, yet, as she will okay, come on. As she will repeatedly point out, she is more than that. She's rational. Despite her provincial residence, she's no victim of superstitious folklore beliefs. And although her assurances in this regard might seem redundant at times, they serve no other purpose than to convince you, dear I'm assuming that's supposed to be skeptical reader, that she's a reliable source and her testament nothing but the truth. A word of warning. At times you might be tempted to laugh at the people in this story and their inability to see what's right in front of them. Laura lives at the height of the scientific revolution in the Age of Enlightenment. The belief that all the world's mysteries would soon be solved is still widespread. The scientific disillusionment from which Dr. Hesselius suffers has not spread to the remote region Laura calls her home. Fairy tales and mythology can no longer serve to explain the world's many mysteries, and science has not filled those gaps. Laura is adept at employing strictly scientific methods to deduce those parts of the narration she has not witnessed herself. I have taken the liberty to omit her numerous references to relevant scientific literature. Yet, as more and more inexplicable occurrences present themselves, she is caught in a bind between her rational belief system and her emotions. Okay. With all the progress and benefits that the Age of Enlightenment has brought about, Laura's tale encourages us to ask whether we might have lost something valuable in the process. Science is, of course, merely one of many lenses through which we may choose to perceive the world. Rationalism or atheism can easily turn into quasi-religions as they replace previous belief systems within the human psyche. Chapter 1. A Guest. Oh, Jesus. Just immediately. Oh, man. I'm already feeling like this game is gonna test my reading vocabulary. Thank God I'm very advanced in that. Okay. Although we are by no means magnificent people in Shish. In Styria, we inhabit a castle, or Schloss. I'm assuming that's German. Okay. Styria. Situated at the center of Europe, today divided by Austria and Slovenia, the country provides the perfect setting. Okay. Oh man, this is gonna be fun. I might read these on my own. Okay. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. Scantily enough, ours would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place, where everything's so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all materially add to our comforts, or even luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service when he purchased this feudal residence and the small estate on which it stands, a bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its bridge. It was never raised in my time. Its moat is full of branches and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface are white fleets of water lilies. Over all this, the Schloss, oh gosh, come on. The Schloss, come on. Oh dear, this is gonna be one of those games, I feel like. The Schloss shows its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right, a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. I've said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I say the truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. That's pretty long? The nearest inhabited Schloss of any historic associations is that of old General... Oh my god, come on. Is of old General Spielsdorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. God, you think that since I am German I know how to pronounce this? Nope. I've said the nearest inhabited village because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say, in the direction of the General Spielsdorf's Schloss, a ruined village. It has a quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are the mouldering tombs of the once proud family Karnstein, now extinct. It was they who once owned the equally desolate chateau which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I gotta remember, this book was written in the 1800s. So there's gonna be some very old language here. So I can't hold it against it. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the buildings attached to the Schloss. Listen and wonder. My father, who's the kindest man on earth, and I, at the date of my story only 19, constitute the family at the Schloss. Okay, so she's 19. God, here I am thinking she's 14. God, she doesn't look 19 though. Like, she looks 14 to me. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who had been with me from my infancy. I couldn't remember the time when her kind, benevolent face wasn't a familiar picture in my memory. This was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me the loss of my mother, whom I don't even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our little dinner party. There was a fourth. Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, a lady such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added English. Wait, what? Okay, let me reread that again. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French, okay, and broken English, to which... Okay, now I get it. The latter, partly to prevent its becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a babble at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. Besides, there were 2 or 3 young lady friends, pretty nearly my own age, who were occasional visitors for longer or shorter terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you. Oh dear. Oh gosh, come on. My gouvernante had just so much control over me as you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl, whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence, which produced a terrible impression upon my memory, which in fact never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it shouldn't be recorded here. You will See, however, by and by, why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, was a large room in the upper story of the castle, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old, when one night I awoke, and looking around the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I wasn't frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales. Of all such lore as makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall, nearer to our faces. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper, preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when, to my surprise, I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. It was that of a girl who was kneeling, with her hands on the coverlet. Coverlet? I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed, and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed, and I fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. Wonder if that's an early glimpse at, I'm assuming the vampire, Carmilla, and she just bit into my chest. Don't really understand why you would go into the chest when the neck is perfectly good, or the wrist, but okay. Oh, jeez. The girl started back, with her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor, and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story, they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with an unwanted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, and peep under tables, and pluck open cupboards. The housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all 3 examining my chest, where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the 2 other servants who were in charge of the nursery remained sitting up all night. From that time on, a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. For a good while every second day he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror and couldn't bear to be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully, and asking the nurse a number of questions, and laughing very heartily at one of the answers. Patting me on the shoulder and kissing me, he told me not to be frightened, that it was nothing but a dream and couldn't hurt me. But I wasn't comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman wasn't a dream, and I was awfully frightened. I was a little consoled by the nursery maids assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me and lain down beside me in the bed. That I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face. But this, though supported by the nurse, didn't quite satisfy me. I remembered, in the course of that day, a venerable old man in a black cassock? I don't know what that word is. Coming into the room with the nurse and housekeeper and talking a little to them, and very kindly to me. What the fuck? Okay. His face was oh, I recognize this music. I did look at the credits. A lot of Kevin MacLeod's music was in this, and it's like, well, I watch a lot of YouTube, so I know what this music is. His face was very sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray. He joined my hands together and desired me to say, softly, while they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers for us, for Jesus' sake." Oh, great. I thought I got away from from Christianity.
I think these were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself, and my nurse used for years to make me say them in my prayers. I remembered so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black cassock as he stood in that rude, lofty, brown room. The clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering its shadowy atmosphere through the small window. He kneeled, and the 3 women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for what had appeared to me a long time. I forgot all my life preceding that event, and for some time after it's also all obscure. Yet the scenes I've just described stand out vivid as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. I'm now going to tell you something so strange that it will require all your faith in my veracity to believe my story. It's not only true, nevertheless, but truth of which I've been an eyewitness.
Okay?
It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista which I have mentioned as lying in front of the Schloss.
General Spielsdorf can't come to us so soon as I'd hoped.
He was to have paid us a visit of some weeks, and we had expected his arrival next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeldt. I had never seen her, but had heard her described as a very charming girl, in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was more disappointed than a young lady living in a town, or a bustling neighborhood, can possibly imagine. This visit and the new acquaintance it promised had furnished my daydream for many weeks. "And how soon does he come?"
Not till autumn. Not for 2 months, I dare say. And I'm very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Reinfeldt.
"And why?"
Because the poor young lady is dead. Oh, okay. I quite forgot I hadn't told you, but you weren't in the room when I'd received the General's letter this evening. Here it is. I'm afraid he's in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written very nearly in distraction.
I was very much shocked. General Spielsdorf had mentioned in his first letter, 6 or 7 weeks before, that she wasn't so well as he would wish her, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger. We sat down on a rude bench, under a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendor behind the sylvan horizon. The stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge wound through many a group of noble trees, almost at our feet, reflecting in its current the fading crimson of the sky. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory, that I read it twice over, the second time aloud to my father. Yet I was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It said, "I have lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. During the last days of dear Bertha's illness I wasn't able to write to you. Before then I had no idea of her danger. I've lost her, and now learn all too late. She died in the peace of innocence, and in the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool have I been! I thank God my child died without a suspicion of the cause of her sufferings. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness, and the accursed passion of the agent of all this misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affectation of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, all too late. I can't write articulately now. I'm distracted. So soon as I shall have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself for a time to inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Sometime in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live, I'll see you. That is, if you permit me. I'll then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend. In these terms ended this strange letter. Though I had... Frickin' avast. Sorry about that. Though I had never seen Bertha Reinfeldt, my eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence. I was startled, as well as profoundly disappointed. The sun had now set, and it was twilight by the time I had returned the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences which I had just been reading. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the road that passes the Schloss in front, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the bridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, who had come out, without their bonnets, to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their voices gabbling in animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them at the bridge, and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees, and was lost to sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crosses the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stands a ruined tower which once guarded that pass. And beyond the bridge an abrupt eminence rises, covered with trees, and showing in the shadows some grey ivy-clustered rocks. Over the sward and low grounds a thin film of mist was stealing like smoke, marking the distances with a transparent veil, and here and there we could see the river faintly flashing in the moonlight. No softer, sweeter scene could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but nothing could disturb its character of profound serenity, and the enchanted glory and vagueness of the prospect. My father, who enjoyed the picturesque, and I stood looking in silence over the expanse beneath us. The two good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene and were eloquent upon the moon. Madame Perrodon was a matronly middle-aged romantic. She talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, in right of her father who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, and something of a mystic.
Oh dear, I'm not giving accents.
When the moon is shining with a light so intense as it is tonight, it indicates a special spiritual activity. The effect of the full moon in such a state of brilliancy is manifold. It acts on dreams, it acts on lunacy, it acts on nervous people. It has all kinds of marvelous physical influences connected with life. My cousin, who was mate of a merchant ship, was having a nap on deck on such a night, lying on his back, with his face full in the light on the moon.
Wait, what?
Excuse me. He awoke after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek, with his features horribly drawn to one side, and his countenance never quite recovered its equilibrium.
Yes? No. Sorry about that. I have a cat that loves to mess with me. No, you're not digging in the trash. Keep away. Hey, no playing. Ow, stop. No, you're not allowed to play. Not now.
The moon, this night, is full of idyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the Schloss, how all its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands had lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests. There are indolent styles of the spirits in which, indisposed to talk ourselves, the talk of others is pleasant to our listless ears, and I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation.
I've got into one of my moping moods tonight. In truth, I know not why I'm so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you, but how I caught it, found it, or came by it, I forget the rest. But I feel as if some great misfortune were hanging over us. I suppose the poor General's afflicted letter has had something to do with it. Oh. Oh my god, this music. I'm not saying it's the game. I'm not saying it's Visual Gothic's fault for including familiar music. Like, they worked with what they could get, But it's still funny, the fact that I can recognize this.
At this moment, the sudden sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. 2 horsemen first crossed the bridge, then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. It seemed to be the traveling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. It became, in a few moments, greatly more interesting, for just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together. And dashing between the horsemen who rode in front,
"Hey, shoo up, stop. Please."
And dashing between the horsemen...
Wow, you stop. Okay. Can you stop? Are you done?
Came thundering down along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. We all advanced in curiosity and horror, me rather in silence, the rest with various ejaculations of terror. Our suspense didn't last long. Just before you reached the castle drawbridge, on the route they were coming, there stands by the roadside a magnificent lime tree. On the other stands an ancient stone cross, at sight of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved so as to bring the wheel over the projecting roots of the tree. Excuse me. I knew what was coming. I covered my eyes, unable to see it out, and turned my head away. At the same moment I heard a cry from my lady friends, who had gone on a little. Curiosity opened my eyes, and I saw a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses were on the ground, the carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure had got out, and stood with clasped hands, raising the handkerchief that was in them every now and then to her eyes. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady, who appeared to be lifeless. My dear papa was already beside the elder lady, evidently tendering his aid in the resources of his schloss. The lady didn't appear to hear him, or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl who was being placed against the slope of the bank. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who piqued himself on being something of a physician, had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. The lady clasped her hands and looked upward, as if in a momentary transport of gratitude, but immediately she broke out again in that theatrical way which is, I believe, natural to some people. She was what is called a fine-looking woman for her time of life, it must have been quite beautiful. She was tall but not thin, and dressed in black velvet. She looked rather pale, but with a proud and commanding countenance, though now strangely agitated.
Who has ever been so born to calamity? Here am I, on a journey of life and death, in prosecuting which to lose an hour is possibly to lose all. My child won't have recovered sufficiently to resume her route for who can say how long. I must leave her. I can't, I dare not, delay. How far on, sir, can you tell, is the nearest village? I must leave her there and shall not see my darling, or even hear of her till my return, 3 months hence.
I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear,
"Oh, Papa, pray ask to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful. Please do."
If Madame will entrust her child to the care of my daughter, and of her good gouvernante, Madame Peridon, and should she permit her to return as our guest under my charge, until her return, it will confer a distinction and obligation upon us. We shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves. I cannot do that, sir, for it would be to task your kindness and chivalry cruelly. It would, on the contrary, be to confer on us a very great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune in a visit from which she had long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. The nearest village on your route is distant and affords no such inn as you could think of placing your daughter at. You can't allow her to continue her journey for any considerable distance without danger. If, as you say, you can't suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight, and nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here.
There was something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and even imposing, and in her manner so engaging as to impress one, quite apart from the dignity of her equipage, with a conviction that she was a person of consequence. By this time the carriage was replaced in its upright position. Sorry, I just want to relax. In its upright position, and the horses quite tractable in the traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which I fancied wasn't quite so affectionate as one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. Then she beckoned slightly to my father and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him out of hearing. She talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had hitherto spoken. I was filled with wonder that my father didn't seem to perceive the change, and also unspeakably curious to learn what it could be that she was speaking, almost in his ear, with so much earnestness and rapidity. 2 or 3 minutes at most, I think, she remained thus employed. Then she turned, and a few steps brought her to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She kneeled beside her for a moment and whispered, as Madame supposed, a little benediction in her ear. Then, hastily kissing her, she stepped into her carriage. The door was closed, the footmen in stately liveries jumped up behind, the outriders spurred on, the postilions cracked their whips, the horses plunged and broke suddenly into a furious canter that threatened soon again to become a gallop, and the carriage whirled away, followed at the same rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to sight in the misty wood, and the very sound of the hoofs and the wheels died away in the silent night air. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure hadn't been an illusion of a moment, but the young lady who just at that moment opened her eyes. I couldn't see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly,
Where is Mama?
Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly and added some comfortable assurances.
Where am I? What is this place? I don't see the carriage. And Maska, where is she?
Madame answered all of her questions in so far as she understood them, and gradually the young lady remembered how the misadventure came about. She was glad to hear that no one in or in attendance on the carriage was hurt, and on learning that her mamma had left her here till her return in about 3 months, she wept. I was going to add my consolations to those of Madame Perrodon when Mademoiselle de la Fontaine placed her hand upon my arm. "Don't approach! One at a time is as much as she can at present converse with. A very little excitement would possibly overpower her now. As soon as she is comfortably in bed, I thought, I'll run up to her room and see her." My father in the meantime had sent a servant on horseback for the physician, who lived about 2 leagues away, and a bedroom was being prepared for the young lady's reception. The stranger now rose, and leaning on Madame's arm, walked slowly over the bridge and into the castle gate. In the hall, servants waited to receive her, and she was conducted forthwith to her room. The room we usually sat in as our drawing room is long, having 3 windows that looked upon the forest scene I have just described. It's furnished in old carved oak, with large carved cabinets, and the chairs are cushioned with crimson Uretch velvet. The walls are covered with tapestry and surrounded with great gold frames, the figures being as large as life, in ancient and very curious costume, and the subjects represented are hunting, hawking, and generally festive. It's not too stately to be extremely comfortable, and here we had our tea, for with his usual patriotic leanings, Papa insisted that the national beverage should make its appearance regularly with our coffee and chocolate. We sat here this night, and with candles lighted, were talking over the adventure of the evening. Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine were both of our party. The young stranger had hardly lain down in her bed when she sank into a deep sleep, and those ladies had left her in the care of a servant.
How do you like our guest? Tell me all about her.
Too many characters, and I'm trying to be quiet. I like her extremely. She is, I almost think, the prettiest creature I ever saw. About your age, and so gentle and nice. She's absolutely beautiful. And such a sweet voice. Did you remark a woman in the carriage after it was set up again, who didn't get out, but only looked from the window?
No, I haven't seen her.
She was a hideous woman, with a sort of colored turban on her head, who kept gazing from the carriage window, all the while nodding and grinning derisively towards us, with gleaming eyes and large white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in fury. Did you remark what an ill-looking pack of men the servants were? Yes, ugly, hang-dog-looking fellows as ever I beheld in my life. I hope they mayn't rob the poor lady in the forest. They're clear rogues, however. They got everything to rights in a minute. I dare say they're worn out with too long traveling. Besides looking wicked, their faces were so strangely lean and dark and sullen. I am very curious, I own, but I dare say the young lady will tell you all about it tomorrow, if she's sufficiently recovered. I don't think she will. What are you doing?
At that he smiled mysteriously and slightly nodded his head as if he knew more about it than he cared to tell us. This made us all the more inquisitive as to what had passed between him and the lady in the black velvet, in the brief but earnest interview that had immediately preceded her departure. We were scarcely alone, and when I entreated him to tell me, he didn't need much pressing.
There's no particular reason why I shouldn't tell you. She expressed a reluctance to trouble us with the care of her daughter, saying she was in delicate health and nervous, but not subject to any kind of seizure, she volunteered that, nor to any illusion, being in fact perfectly sane.
How very odd to say all that. It was so unnecessary.
At all events it was said, and as you wish to know all that passed, which was indeed very little, I tell you. She then said, I'm making a long journey of vital importance. She emphasized the word, rapid and secret. I shall return for my child in 3 months. In the meantime, she'll be silent as to who we are, whence we come, and whither we're traveling. That is all she said. She spoke very pure French. When she said the word secret, she paused for a few seconds, looking sternly, her eyes fixed on mine. I fancy she makes a great point of that. You saw how quickly she was gone. I hope I haven't done a very foolish thing in taking charge of the young lady.
For my part, I was delighted. I was longing to see and talk to her, and only waiting till the doctor should give me leave. You, who live in towns, can have no idea how great an event the introduction of a new friend is, in such a solitude as surrounded us. The doctor didn't arrive till nearly 1 o'clock, but I could no more have gone to my bed and slept than I could have overtaken, on foot, the carriage in which the princess in black velvet had driven away. When the physician came down to the drawing-room, it was to report very favorably upon his patient. She was now sitting up, her pulse quite regular, apparently perfectly well. She had sustained no injury, and the little shock to her nerves had passed away quite harmlessly. There could be no harm certainly in my seeing her, if we both wished it, and with this permission I sent, forthwith, to know whether she would allow me to visit her for a few minutes in her room. The servant returned immediately to say that she desired nothing more. You may be sure I wasn't long in availing myself of this permission. Our visitor lay in one of the most handsomest rooms in the Schloss. It was, perhaps, a little stately. There was a somber piece of tapestry opposite the foot of the bed, representing Cleopatra with the snakes at her bosom. Other solemn classic scenes were displayed, a little faded, upon the other walls. But there was gold carving in rich and varied color enough in the other decorations of the room to more than redeem the gloom of the old tapestry. There were candles at the bedside. She was sitting up, her slender, pretty figure enveloped in the soft silk dressing gown, which her mother had thrown over her feet as she lay upon the ground.
What the fuck? Okay, now she's presenting herself a lot more differently than she did.
What was it that, as I reached the bedside and had just begun my little greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil a step or two from before her? I'll tell you. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory, and on which I had for so many years so often ruminated with horror, where no one suspected of what I was thinking. It was pretty, even beautiful, and when I first beheld it wore the same melancholy expression. But this almost instantly lighted into a strange fixed smile of recognition. There was a silence of fully a minute, and then at length she spoke. I couldn't.
What are you doing?
How wonderful! 12 years ago I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since. 12 years ago, in vision or reality, I certainly saw you. I couldn't forget your face. It's remained before my eyes ever since.
Wonderful indeed.
Oh, wait a minute. 12 years ago, so... Laura was 6 when she first met this girl. 12 plus... 18. Okay, so that means they're both 18 in this. Okay. She looks God.
With an effort I overcame the horror that had for a time suspended my utterances. Her smile had softened. Whatever I had fancied strange in it was gone, and it and her dimpling cheeks were now delightfully pretty and intelligent. I felt reassured and continued more in the vein which hospitality indicated, to bid her welcome and to tell her how much pleasure her accidental arrival had given us all, and especially what a happiness it was to me. I took her hand as I spoke. I was a little shy, as lonely people are, but the situation made me eloquent and even bold. She pressed my hand, she laid hers upon it, and her eyes glowed, as looking hastily into mine, she smiled again and blushed. She answered my welcome very prettily. I sat down beside her, still in awe. I must tell you my vision about you. It's so very strange that you and I should have had, each of the other so vivid a dream, that each should have seen, I you and you me, looking as we do now, when of course we both were mere children. I was a child, about 6 years old, when I awoke from a confused and troubled dream, and found myself in the room, unlike my nursery, wainscoted clumsily in some dark wood, and with cupboards and bedsteads, and chairs, and benches placed about it. The beds were, I thought, all empty, and the room itself without anyone but myself in it. After looking about me for some time, and admiring especially an iron candlestick with 2 branches, which I should certainly know again, I crept under one of the beds to reach the window. But as I got from under the bed, I heard someone crying, and looking up while I was still upon my knees, I saw you, most assuredly you, as I see you now. A beautiful young lady, with golden hair and large blue eyes, and lips, your lips, you as you are here. Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms around you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was aroused by a scream. You were sitting up screaming. I was frightened, slipped down upon the ground, and, it seemed to me, lost consciousness for a moment, as when I came to myself, I was again in my nursery at home. Your face I've never forgotten since. I couldn't be misled by mere resemblance. You're the lady whom I saw then. It was now my turn to relate my corresponding vision, which I did, to the undisguised wonder of my new acquaintance. I don't know which should be most afraid of the other. If you are less pretty, I think I should be very much afraid of you, but being as you are, and you and I both so young, I feel only that I have made your acquaintance 12 years ago, and have already a right to your intimacy. Wait, okay. At all events, it does seem as if we were destined, from our earliest childhood, to be friends. Friends, quote-unquote. Believe me, I know there's some stuff that goes down in this book. I wonder whether you feel as strangely drawn towards me as I do to you. I've never had a friend. Shall I find one now? Now the truth is, I felt rather unaccountably towards the beautiful stranger. I did feel, as she said, drawn towards her, but there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She interested and won me. She was so beautiful and so indescribably engaging. I perceived now something of languor, and exhaustion stealing over her, and hastened to bid her good night. The doctor thinks that you ought to have a maid to sit up with you tonight. One of ours is waiting, and you'll find her a very useful and quiet creature. How kind of you, but I couldn't sleep. I never could with an attendant in the room. I shan't require any assistance, and, shall I confess my weakness, I'm haunted with a terror of robbers. Our house was robbed once and 2 servants murdered, so I always lock my door. It has become a habit, and you look so kind I know you'll forgive me. I see there's a key in the lock. She held me close in her pretty arms for a moment and whispered in my ear. Okay. Good night, darling. It's very hard to part with you, but good night. Tomorrow, but not early, I shall see you again. Okay. She sank back on the pillow with a sigh, and her fine eyes followed me with a fond and melancholy gaze, and she murmured again, Good night, dear friend. Okay. Young people like, and even love, on impulse. I was flattered by the evident, though as yet undeserved, fondness she showed me. I liked the confidence with which she had once received me. She was determined that we should be very near friends. Next day came and we met again. I was delighted with my companion, that is to say, in many respects. Her looks lost nothing in daylight. She was certainly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and the unpleasant remembrance of the face presented in my early dream had lost the effect of the first unexpected recognition. She confessed that she had experienced a similar shock on seeing me, and precisely the same faint antipathy that had mingled with my admiration of her. We now laughed together over our momentary horrors. Chapter 2, Drifting. Oh, this is... Man, I didn't... Excuse me. I had to take a little bit of a drink. Alright, I just want to take a quick little break to see if the stream is looking good, if you are enjoying Carmilla so far. I'm very interested, but it's like already we're dealing with some lesbian action. And I don't mean like in terms of, it's like no girl just straight up like, you know, whispers into another girl's ear and says those words in a very platonic way. She may say it's platonic, but I don't think it's platonic. You know that. Okay. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. Yet there was some that didn't please me so well. I shall begin by describing her. She was above the middle height of women. The fuck does that mean? Middle height of women? You mean average? You mean to tell... Well, actually, what was the average height for women back then? I guess like 5 foot?
I mean, I know now it's like, it's 5'5", and it's like, well, I perfectly fit that description. But still.
She was above the middle height of women. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were languid.
Well, I'm very sorry, Gamer X.
Very languid indeed. Yet there was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant. Her features were small and beautifully formed. Her eyes large, dark, and lustrous. Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, and in color a rich dark brown with a violet shimmer. I loved to let it down, tumbling with its own weight, as she lay back in her chair talking in her sweet low voice. I used to fold and braid it, and spread it out and play with it.
The hell was that? I looked up just for a second to see her blushing. Can you stop?
Heavens, if I'd but known all. I said there were particulars which didn't please me. I've told you that her confidence won me the first night I saw her. Yet I found that she exercised with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything in fact connected with her life, plans, and people, in ever wakeful reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable. Perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by this stately lady in black velvet. But curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl can endure, with patience, that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do anyone to tell me what I so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense of honor? Why would she not believe me when I assured her, so solemnly, that I wouldn't divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her smiling, melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light.
Man, this author loved to use the word melancholy, didn't he? Or she, or they.
I can't say we quarreled upon this point, for she wouldn't quarrel upon any. It was, of course, very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I really couldn't help it, and I might just as well have let it alone. What she did tell me amounted, in my unconscionable estimation, to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. She wouldn't tell me the name of her family, nor their armorial bearings, nor the name of their estate, nor even that of the country they lived in. You're not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity, and rather insinuated than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I did attack her more directly, but no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her. But I must add that her evasion was conducted with so pretty a melancholy and deprecation, with so many and even passionate declarations of her liking for me. Trust in my honor, and with so many promises that I should at last know all, that I couldn't find it in my heart long to be offended with her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her.
My God, man, this is getting.
And laying her cheek to mine, murmur with her lips near my ear,
"Oh dear, okay."
In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die, into mine. And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips in soft kisses gently blow upon my cheek.
Will you stop? Back away from my trash. Why are you digging into it? Hashtag melancholy, yup. Think me not cruel, because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your heart is wounded, mine bleeds with yours. I cannot help it as I draw near to you. You, in your turn, will draw near to others, and learn the rapture of that cruelty, which yet is love. So, for a while, seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me, with all your loving spirit. Her agitations in her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not of very frequent occurrence, I must allow, I used to wish to extricate myself. But my energies seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear, and soothed my resistance into a trance, from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. In these mysterious moods, I didn't like her. Are we related? I used to ask. What can you mean by all this? I remind you perhaps as someone whom you love, but you mustn't. I hate it. I don't know you. I don't know myself when you look so and talk so. She just sighed at my vehemence, and then turned away and dropped my hand. I experienced a strange tumultuous excitement that was pleasurable, ever and anon. Excuse me. What? Do you want out of this room? Can you stop with digging into my trash? Stop! I'm gonna... Hey, no playing! I'll throw your ass out! Stop digging into my trash! Can you stop? Back away! Mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration, and also of abhorrence. This I know is paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. I tremble now, with a confused and horrible recollection of certain occurrences and situations, in the ordeal through which I was unconsciously passing, though with a vivid and very sharp remembrance of the main current of my story. But, I suspect, in all lives there are certain emotional scenes, those in which our passions have been most wildly and terribly roused, that are of all others the most vaguely and dimly remembered. Sometimes after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion will take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering, and with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one forever." Man, Carmilla, don't play. Then she had thrown herself back in her chair, with her small hands over her eyes, leaving me trembling. Man, okay. Respecting these very extraordinary manifestations, I strove in vain to form any satisfactory theory. I couldn't refer to them to affectation or trick. It was unmistakably the momentary breaking out of suppressed instinct and emotion. Was she, notwithstanding her mother's volunteered denial, subject to brief visitations of insanity, or was there a disguise in a romance? As I said before, like this book was written in the 1890s, I believe. And I'd imagine that for this kind of story where, you have two girls engaging in these, in a love affair, this had to have been a very, I feel like the word controversial may be appropriate at the time. Because I don't know what America's... Well, actually, this isn't America. This would have been European. I don't know what Europe's views on the LGBT plus community was way back when. I doubt it was positive. But I'd imagine that with this kind of story, it's like... This could be seen as being very lustful, if that makes sense. But in terms of the universe itself, it really does. It seems like that Laura isn't very. She is very much a girl that grew up in isolation. Save for a few people that visited her, she hasn't really learned about the outside world. So I'd imagine that for in this kind of situation where she has another girl, like, straight up, like, flirting with her, making moves on her and all that, this would be very, very, like, strange and new and all kinds of complications, if that makes sense. Like, it's hard for me to describe it, but, a person discovering sexuality for the first time. And that's the best I can describe it as.
I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade, with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? But there were many things against this hypothesis, highly interesting as it was to my vanity. I could boast of no little attention such as masculine gallantry delights to offer. Between these passionate moments there were long intervals of commonplace, of gaiety. Yet there were also times of brooding melancholy during which her eyes, always following me, were full of melancholy fire. Except in these brief periods of mysterious excitement, her ways were girlish, and there was always a languor about her, quite incompatible with a masculine system in a state of health. You mean to tell me Laura thought that Carmilla was a cross-dressing boy? I guess, like, in a way, in the kind of, situation and society was, it could very well have been, it could have been that, that Carmilla was really, like, a boy cross-dressing as a woman, albeit he must have been a very feminine-looking boy if he could pass that well. Normally in that kind of situation, I would propose the idea of a trans Carmilla, but I doubt, but it's like, again, I doubt that's the issue here. In some respects, her habits were odd, perhaps not so singular in the opinion of a town person like you, as they appeared to us rustic people. She used to come down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would then take a cup of chocolate, but eat nothing. We then went out for a walk, which was a mere saunter, and she seemed, almost immediately, exhausted, and either returned to the schloss or sat on one of the benches that were placed here and there among the trees. This was a bodily languor in which her mind didn't sympathize.
Also, hey, Eric, you've missed about an hour and 20 minutes. And you also missed some really nice lesbian action.
She was always an animated talker and very intelligent. She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home, or mentioned an adventure or situation, or an early recollection.
Oh yeah, you want out. No, don't go in the closet. Alright, I'm letting you out. You're starting to bother me. I'll be right back. Cheerio. Hey, get out of the closet. Come on, let's get you out. Hey, come on. Cheerio, come on. Get out. You're in the closet because you know I can't get you there. Hurry. Come on. Get over here. Come on. Come on. Give me. Oh, for God's sakes. I'm just gonna mute the mic real quick. Alright, I'm back. I had to... So after trying to, get the cat out of my closet, I had to go refill his food and water. I swear, living with a walking, talking toddler sucks sometimes. Because he won't shut up if he doesn't have his things. Anyway, back to the story. God, I don't even know where I was in the paragraph.
She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home, or mentioned an adventure or situation, or an early recollection, which indicated a people of strange manners, and described customs of which we knew nothing.
Excuse me. What the fuck was that? My mic just moved downward for some reason.
I gathered from these chance hints that her native country was much more remote than I had first fancied.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When this picture popped up, I thought these crosses were dancing. Like, these graves are dancing.
As we stood thus one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. It was that of a pretty young girl, whom I had often seen, the daughter of one of the rangers of the forest. The poor man was walking behind the coffin of his darling. She was his only child, and he looked quite heartbroken. Peasants walking two and two came behind. They were singing a funeral hymn. I rose to mark my respect as they passed, and joined in the hymn they were very sweetly singing. My companion shook me a little roughly, and I turned surprised. Don't you perceive how discordant that is? No, I think it very sweet, on the contrary.
Okay, you pierce my ears!
Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your forms wound me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss. Why must you die? Everyone must die, and all are happier when they do. Come home.
Whoa.
My father has gone on with the clergyman to the churchyard. I thought you knew she was to be buried today.
She? I don't trouble my head about peasants. I don't know who she is.
She's the poor girl who fancied she saw a ghost a fortnight ago, and has been dying ever since, till yesterday when she expired.
Tell me nothing about ghosts. I shan't sleep tonight if you do.
I hope there's no plague or fever coming. All this looks very like it. The swineherd's young wife died only a week ago, and she thought something seized her by the throat as she lay in her bed, and nearly strangled her.
Oh boy, I wonder who that is.
Papa says such horrible fancies do accompany some forms of fever. She was quite well the day before. She sank afterwards and died before a week.
Well, her funeral is over, I hope, and her hymns sung, and our ears shan't be tortured with that discord and jargon. It has made me nervous. Sit down here beside me. Sit close. Hold my hand. Press it hard, harder.
We had moved a little back, and had come to another seat. She sat down. Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened, and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hands were clenched, and she frowned and compressed her lips, while she stared down upon the ground at her feet, and trembled all over with a continued shudder as irrepressible as shiver. All her energy seemed strained to suppress a fit, with which she was then breathlessly tugging, and at length a low convulsive cry of suffering broke from her, and gradually the hysteria subsided. There! That comes a strangling people with hymns. Hold me still. It's passing away.
Okay.
And so, gradually it did. And perhaps to dissipate the somber impression which the spectacle had left upon me, she became unusually animated and chatty, and so we got home. This was the first time I had seen her exhibit any definable symptoms of that delicacy of health which her mother had spoken of. It was the first time, also, I had seen her exhibit anything like temper. Both passed away like a summer cloud, and never but once afterwards did I witness on her part a momentary sign of anger. I'll tell you how it happened. She and I were looking out of one of the long drawing-room windows, when there entered the courtyard, over a drawbridge, a figure of a wanderer whom I knew very well. He used to visit the Schloss generally twice a year. It was the figure of a hunchback, with the sharp lean features that generally accompany deformity. He wore a pointed black beard, and he was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white fangs. He was dressed in black and crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, from which hung all manner of things.
So he was designed by Tetsuya Nomura.
Behind he carried a magic lantern and 2 boxes, which I well knew, in one of which was a salamander, and in the other a mandrake. These monsters used to make my father laugh. They were compounded of parts of monkeys, parrots, squirrels, fish, and hedgehogs, dried and stitched together with great neatness and startling effect. It just sounds like he was making a bunch of chimeras, but it's a dead chimera. He had a fiddle, a box of conjuring apparatus, a pair of foils and masks attached to his belt, several other mysterious cases dangling about him, and a black staff with copper ferrules in his hand. His companion was a rough spare dog that followed at his heels, but stopped short, suspiciously at the drawbridge, and in a little while began to howl dismally. In the meantime, the mountebank, standing in the midst of the courtyard, raised his grotesque hat and made us a very ceremonious bow, paying his compliments very volubly in execrable French and German not much better. Man, jump scare galore, please. Then, disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape a lively air to which he sang with a merry discord, dancing with ludicrous airs and activity that made me laugh, in spite of the dog's howling. Then he advanced to the window with many smiles and salutations, in his hat in his left hand, his fiddle on his arm, and with a fluency that never took breath. He gabbled a long advertisement of all his accomplishments, and the resources of the various arts which he placed at our service, and the curiosities and entertainments which it was in his power, at our bidding, to display.
Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the vampire, which is going like the wolf I hear through these woods? They are dying of it right and left, and here is a charm that never fails. Only pin to the pillow, and you may laugh in his face.
These charms consisted of oblong slips of vellum, with cabalistic ciphers and diagrams upon them. Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. He was looking up, and we were smiling down upon him, amused. At least I can answer for myself. His piercing eye, as he looked up in our faces, seemed to detect something that fixed for a moment his curiosity. In an instant he unrolled a leather case, full of all manner of odd little steel instruments.
See here, my lady, I profess, among other things less useful, the art of dentistry.
Plague take the dog! Silence, beast! Psh, she just whips it. Oh my god, I think he did whip it. I was just making a joke.
He howls so that your ladyships can scarcely hear a word. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed like a needle. With my sharp and long sight as I look up, I've seen it distinctly. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must, here I am. Here are my file, my punch, my nippers. I'm sorry. I don't know. God damn it. Sorry, God. I'm sorry. Okay, I need to get back into this. I'll make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady as she is.
Why are you in the closet again? There's nothing in the closet for you. Jeez. Sorry about that. Shit. Shut up. Shut up.
Hey, is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her?
Just run away. The young lady indeed looked very angry as she drew back from the window. How dares that mountebank insult us so? Where is your father? I shall demand redress from him. My father would have had the wretch tied up to the pump and flogged with a cart whip and burnt to the bones with a cattle brand. She retired from the window a step or two and sat down, and had hardly lost sight of the offender, when her wrath subsided as suddenly as it had risen, and she gradually recovered her usual tone, and seemed to forget the little hunchback and his follies. My father was out of spirits that evening. On coming in, he told us that there had been another case very similar to the two fatal ones which had lately occurred. The sister of a young peasant on his estate, only a mile away, was very ill, as had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly in the same way, and was now slowly but steadily sinking.
All this is strictly referable to natural causes. These stupid people... Oh, I don't know why. Dude, I was reading a comment. Shit. I did that thing again where it's like, if I'm reading two different things, I intersperse them together. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions, and so repeat in imagination the images of terror that have infested their neighbors.
But that very circumstance frightens one horribly.
How so?
I am so afraid of fancying I see such things. I think it would be as bad as reality.
We are in God's hands. Nothing can happen without his permission, and all will end well for those who love him. He is our faithful creator. He has made us all and will take care of us.
Creator, nature, and this disease that invades the country is natural. Nature. All things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in the heaven, in the earth, and under the earth act and live as nature ordains? I think so.
The doctor said he would come here today. I want to know what he thinks about it, and what he thinks we had better do.
Doctors never did me any good. Then you've been ill.
More ill than ever you were.
Long ago?
Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forget all but my pain and weakness, and they were not so bad as are suffered in other diseases.
You were very young then.
I dare say, let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend.
She looked languidly in my eyes, and passed her arm round my waist lovingly.
Whoa, okay. Man. You know, I gotta look up the author to see if this was a woman. I hope it, to me, I always feel like if there's a lesbian love story, it better have been written by someone by a woman who loves women. Or I should say a lesbian, but I doubt it.
My father was busy over some papers near the window. Why does your papa like to frighten us so? He doesn't, dear Carmilla. It's the very furthest thing from his mind. Are you afraid, dearest?
Yeah, lesbian. Lesbian!
I should be very much if I fancied there was any real danger of my being attacked as those poor people were.
You're afraid to die?
Yes, everyone is.
But to die as lovers may, to die together so that they may live together.
Girls are caterpillars while they live in the world, to be finally butterflies when the summer comes. But in the meantime there are grubs and larvae. Don't you see, each with their peculiar propensities, necessities, and structure?
So says Monsieur Buffoon in his Buffoon, blah, blah,
in his big book in the next room. Later in the evening the doctor came, and was closeted with Papa for some time.
The bean that makes you... Well, to be honest, the reason why I just say lesbian is just because it's like... It's just my way of saying lesbian. And I think that's actually a nickname for some... And I think that is a nickname lesbians get. It's just lesbians. I don't mean anything by it. It's just a nickname.
He was a skillful man, of 60 and upwards. He wore powder, and shaved his pale face as smooth as a pumpkin. He and Papa emerged from the room together, and I heard Papa laugh.
Well, I do wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons? Oh my god, I hate pulling out voices. Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either.
And so they walked on, and I heard no more. I didn't then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it now. This evening there arrived from Gratz, the grave, dark-faced son of the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. It was a journey of 10 leagues, and whenever a messenger arrived at the Schloss from our little capital of Gratz, we used to crowd about him in the hall to hear the news. This arrival created in our secluded quarters quite a sensation. The cases remained in the hall, and the messenger was taken charge of by the servants till he had eaten his supper.
Excuse me.
Then, with assistance, and armed with hammer, ripping chisel, and turnscrew, he met us in the hall, where we had assembled to witness the unpacking of the cases. Carmilla sat looking listlessly on, while one after the other the old pictures, nearly all portraits, which had undergone the process of renovation, were brought to light. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures, which were about to be restored to their places, had come to us through her. My father had a list in his hand, from which he read as the artist rummaged out the corresponding numbers. I don't know that the pictures were very good, but they were undoubtedly very old, and some of them very curious also. They had, for the most part, the merit of being now seen by me, I may say for the first time, for the smoke and dust of time had all but obliterated them.
There's a picture that I haven't seen yet. In one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read, Marcia Karnstein, and the date 1698, and I'm curious to see how it has turned out.
I remembered it. It was about 2 feet high and nearly square, without a frame, but it was so blackened by age that I couldn't make it out. The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was the effigy of Carmilla. Carmilla, dear, here's an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak in this picture. Isn't it beautiful, Papa? And see even the little mole on her throat.
Certainly it is a wonderful likeness.
Yet he looked away, and to my surprise seemed but little struck by it, and went on talking to the picture cleaner. The latter was also something of an artist, and discoursed with intelligence about the portraits of other works, which his art had just brought into light and color. Meanwhile, I was more and more lost in wonder the more I looked at the picture. Will you let me hang this picture in my room, Papa?
Certainly, dear. I'm very glad you think it's so like. It must be prettier even than I thought it, if it is.
The young lady didn't acknowledge this pretty speech, didn't seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes gazing on me in contemplation, and she smiled in a kind of rapture. And now you can read quite plainly the name that's written in the corner. It's not Marcia. It looks as if it was done in gold. The name is Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, and this is a little coronet over and underneath AD 1698. I am descended from the Karnsteins. That is, Mama was. Ah, so am I think. A very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now? None who bear the name, I believe. The family were ruined in some civil wars long ago, but the ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles away. How interesting. But see what beautiful moonlight. She glanced through the hall door, which stood a little open. Suppose you take a little ramble round the court and look down at the road and river. It's so like the night you came to us.
You know, is it weird to me to think that Carmilla in that normal portrait of hers has bedroom eyes? Like, her eyes are drawn in the way that it's like, She's just looking at you like, you know, kind of seductively, but not really, if that makes sense.
She rose, and each with her...
The heck was that?
And each with her pavement about the other's... bleh, and each with her arm about the other's waist, we walked out upon the pavement.
Oh, that's a very... You know, this is kind of like my aesthetic right now. If this were seen in a more, like, realistic art style, I would definitely want a picture of this. Excuse me.
In silence, slowly we walked down to the drawbridge, where the beautiful landscape opened before us. And so you were thinking of the night I came here. Are you glad I came? Delighted, dear Carmilla. And you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room.
Oh, she's blushing now, too.
She sighed and drew her arm closer around my waist. How romantic you are, Carmilla. Whenever you tell me your story, it'll be made up chiefly of some one great romance. I'm sure, Carmilla, you've been in love, that there is, at this moment, an affair of the heart going on. I have been in love with no one, and never shall, unless it should be with you. How beautiful she looked in the moonlight. She exhaled shakily as she let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. She kissed me silently.
Oh, okay.
Shy and strange was the look with which she quickly hid her face in my neck and hair, with tumultuous sighs, that seemed almost a sob, and pressed in mine a hand that trembled.
Oh, okay.
Her soft cheek was glowing against mine. Darling, darling, I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so.
Okay.
I started from her. She was gazing on me with eyes from which all fire, all meaning had flown, in a face colorless and apathetic. Is there a chill in the air, dear?
Well, I mean, you did just like... I mean... Carmilla, you're really being way too forward with this girl that's probably never had these kinds of interactions before. With neither man or woman.
I almost shiver. Have I been dreaming? Let us come in. Come in. You look ill, Carmilla. A little faint. You certainly must take some wine.
Thank God these two are 18.
Yes, I will. I'm better now. I shall be quite well in a few minutes. Yes, do give me a little wine. Let us look again for a moment. It's the last time, perhaps, I shall see the moonlight with you. How do you feel now, dear Carmilla? Are you really better? I was beginning to take alarm, lest she should have been stricken with the strange epidemic that they said had invaded the country about us. Papa would be grieved beyond measure if he thought you were ever so little ill, without immediately letting us know. We have a very skillful doctor near us, the physician who was with Papa today. I'm sure he is. I know how kind you all are. But, dear child, I'm quite well again. There's nothing ever wrong with me but a little weakness.
Yeah, weakness.
People say I'm languid. I'm incapable of exertion. I could scarcely walk as far as a child of 3 years old. And every now and then the little strength I have falters, and I become as you've just seen me. But after all, I'm very easily set up again. In the moment I'm perfectly myself. See how I've recovered.
Oh, whoops.
So indeed she had. She and I talked a great deal, and very animated she was. And the remainder of that evening passed without any recurrence of what I called her infatuations. I mean, her crazy talk and looks, which embarrassed and even frightened me. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy.
Oh, wow. Chapter 3. descending. You mean to tell me that Carmilla's not even aware of what she's doing to Laura? It's like she just kissed her. I'm not aware of my actions. Apparently.
When we got into the drawing room and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate, although Carmilla didn't take any, she seemed quite herself again. Madame and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine joined us and made a little card party, in the course of which Papa came in for what he called his dish of tea. When the game was over, he sat down beside Carmilla on the sofa.
Carmilla, have you perhaps heard anything from your mother since your arrival here?
No.
Would you happen to know where a letter would reach her at present?
I can't tell, but I've been thinking of leaving you. You've been already too hospitable and too kind to me.
I love that. I don't know if you heard that, but Laura just kind of gasped, and it was an audible gasp.
I've given you an infinity of trouble, and I should wish to take a carriage tomorrow and post in pursuit of her. I know where I shall ultimately find her, although I dare not yet tell you.
But you mustn't dream of any such thing. We can't afford to lose you so. And I won't consent to your leaving us, except under the care of your mother, who is so good as to consent to your remaining with us till she should herself return. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Gamer X. You know, I mean, to be honest, I didn't think this game would be like that kind of exciting thing, especially in this format. I should be quite happy if I knew that you heard from her, but this evening the accounts of the progress of the mysterious disease that has invaded our neighborhood grow even more alarming. And my beautiful guest, I do feel the responsibility, unaided by advice from your mother, very much, but I shall do my best. And one thing is certain, that you mustn't think of leaving us without her distinct direction to that effect. We should suffer too much in parting from you to consent to it easily.
Thank you, sir, 1,000 times for your hospitality. You've all been too kind to me. I have seldom been so happy in all my life before as in your beautiful chateau under your care, and in the society of your dear daughter. So he gallantly, in his old-fashioned way, kissed her hand, smiling and pleased at her little speech. I accompanied Carmilla as usual to her room and sat and chatted with her while she was preparing for bed.
Okay.
Do you think that you'll ever confide fully in me? She turned round smiling, but made no answer, only continued to smile on me. You won't answer that. You can't answer pleasantly. I ought not to have asked you. You were quite right to ask me that, or anything. You don't know how dear you are to me, or you couldn't think any confidence too great to look for. But I'm under vows, no nun half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet, even to you. The time is very near when you shall know everything. You'll think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am, you can't know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There's no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. Now, Carmilla, you're going to talk your wild nonsense again. Not I, silly little fool as I am, and full of whims and fancies. For your sake, I'll talk like a sage. Were you ever at a ball? No. How you do run on. What is it like? How charming it must be. I almost forget it's years ago. You're not so old. Your first ball can hardly be forgotten yet. I remember everything about it, with an effort. I see it all as divers see what's going on above them, through a medium, dense, rippling, but transparent. There occurred that night what has confused the picture and made its colors faint. I was all but assassinated in my bed, wounded here, and never was the same since. Were you near dying? Yes, very. A cruel love, a strange love, that would have taken my life. Love will have its sacrifices. No sacrifice without blood. Let us go to sleep now. I feel so lazy. How can I get up just now and lock my door? She was lying with her tiny hands buried in her rich, wavy hair. Under her cheek, her little head upon the pillow, and her glittering eyes followed me wherever I moved, with a kind of shy smile that I couldn't decipher. I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation. I often wondered whether our pretty guest ever said her prayers. I certainly had never seen her upon her knees. In the morning she never came down until long after our family prayers were over, and at night she never left the drawing room to attend our brief evening prayers in the hall. If it had not been that it had casually come out in one of our careless talks that she had been baptized, I should have doubted her being a Christian. Religion was a subject on which I never heard her speak a word. If I had known the world better, this particular neglect or antipathy would not have so much surprised me. The precautions of nervous people are infectious, and persons of a like temperament are pretty sure, after a time, to imitate them. I had adopted Carmilla's habit of locking her bedroom door, having taken into my head all her whimsical alarms about midnight invaders and prowling assassins. I had also adopted her precaution of making a brief search through her room, to satisfy herself that no lurking assassin or robber was ensconced. These wise measures taken, I got into my bed and fell asleep. A light was burning in my room. This was an old habit of very early date, in which nothing could have tempted me to dispense with. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace. But dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms, or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and entrances as they please and laugh at locksmiths. I had a dream that night that was the beginning of a very strange agony. I can't call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep, but I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed, precisely as I actually was. I saw, or fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving round the foot of the bed, which at first I couldn't accurately distinguish. But I soon saw that it was a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me about 4 or 5 feet long, for it measured fully the length of the hearth rug as it passed over it. I got spooked by the eyes, because that's it's so fucking dark in this game. It continued toing and froing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. I couldn't cry out, although, as you may suppose, I was terrified. Its pace was growing faster, and the room rapidly darker and darker, and at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. "Hi." I felt it spring lightly on the bed.
Man, you keep, sneezing a lot, Shirya. Well, maybe if you weren't in the closet, you wouldn't be sniffing the dust.
The 2 broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain as if 2 large needles darted, an inch or 2 apart, deep into my breast.
I was wondering if the beast was Carmilla in cat form, and she went for the chest again.
I awoke with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burnt there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little at the right side. It was in a dark, loose dress, and its hair was down and covered its shoulders.
Oh.
A block of stone couldn't have been more still. There wasn't the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to have changed its place and was now nearer the door. Then close to it, the door opened and it passed out. Excuse me. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing me a trick and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it and found it locked as usual on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered my head up in the bedclothes and lay there more dead than alive till morning. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which, even now, I recall the occurrence of that night. It was no such transitory terror as the dream leaves behind it. It seemed to deepen by time and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that had encompassed the apparition. I couldn't bear next day to be alone for a moment. I should have told Papa, but for two opposite reasons. At one time I thought he would laugh at my story, and I couldn't bear its being treated as a jest. And at another, I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighborhood. I had myself no misgivings of the kind, and felt there was no need to alarm him. I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle de la Fontaine. Holy shit! They both perceived that I was out of spirits and nervous, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. By the by, the long lime tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom window is haunted. Nonsense. Who tells that story, my dear? Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired, before sunrise, and twice saw the same female figure walking down the lime tree avenue. So he well might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river fields. I dare say, but Martin chooses to be frightened, and never did I see fool more frightened. You mustn't say a word about it to Carmilla, because she could see down that walk from her room window, and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I. Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. I was so frightened last night, I'm sure I should have seen something dreadful if it hadn't been for that charm I bought from the poor little hunchback whom I called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming round my bed, and I awoke in a perfect horror, and I really thought for some seconds I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece. But I felt under my pillow for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared. Without it, or of that I felt certain, something frightful would have made its appearance. Perhaps it would have throttled me, as it did those poor people we heard of. Well, listen to me. I began and recounted my adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. And had you the charm near you? No, I had dropped it into a china vase in the drawing-room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it. At this distance of time I can't tell you, or even understand, how I overcame my horror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless. But I awakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy, which, however, didn't exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. Well, I told you so! I had such delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to the breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before. I'm quite sure it was all fancy, except the dreams. I used to think that evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me it's no such thing. Only a fever passing by, or some other malady, as they often do, he said, knocks at the door and not being able to get in, passes on without alarm. And what do you think the charm is? It has been fumigated or or immersed in some drug and is an antidote against the malaria. Then it acts only on the body? Certainly. You don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop? No, these complaints, wandering in the air, begin by trying the nerves and so infect the brain, but before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That, I'm sure, is what the charm has done for us. It's nothing magical, it's simply natural.
She's basically describing the placebo effect. That was basically her describing the placebo effect. Oh, I'm hearing my father coming home. He's early tonight.
I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best, and the impression was little losing its force. For some nights I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude and languor weighed upon me all day. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I wouldn't have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle, and somehow not unwelcome, possession of me. If it was sad, the tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it might be, my soul acquiesced in it. I wouldn't admit that I was ill. I wouldn't consent to tell my papa, or to have the doctor sent for. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardor the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to the incapacitating effect of that stage of the malady. This fascination increased for a time until it reached a certain point, when gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself with it, deepening, as you shall hear, until it discolored and perverted the whole state of my life. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which began the descent of avarice. Avarice? Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, peculiar cold thrill which we feel in bathing, when we move against the current of a river. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable and were so vague that I could never recollect their scenery and persons, or any one connected portion of their action. But they left an awful impression and a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. After all these dreams, there remained on waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark and of having spoken to people whom I couldn't see, and especially of one clear voice, of a female's, very deep, that spoke as if at a distance, slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly along my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, and longer, more lovingly as they reached my throat, but there the caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster, my breathing rose and fell rapidly and full drawn. A sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation, supervened and turned into a dreadful convulsion, in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My sufferings had, during the last week, told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor which I had long felt began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but, with an obstinacy which now seems to me unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense this was true. I had no pain. I could complain of no bodily derangement. My complaints seemed to be one of the imagination, or the nerves, and, horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them, with a morbid reserve, very nearly to myself. It couldn't be that terrible complaint which the peasants call the opier, for I had now been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days. when death put an end to their miseries. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. Okay. I'm going to tell you now of a dream that led immediately to an odd discovery. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one, sweet and tender, and at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you, beware the assassin."
Oh my god. My god, epilepsy warning.
At the same time, a light sprang up, and I saw Carmilla, standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I wakened with a shriek, possessed with the one idea that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is that of standing on the lobby, crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned always on the lobby, and seeing me, they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but all was vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room. There we rang the bell long and furiously. If my father's room had been at that side of the house, we would have called him up at once to our aid. But, alas, he was quite out of hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which none of us had courage. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got on my dressing gown and slippers, meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants in the lobby, we sallied out together, and having renewed, as fruitlessly, our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did, and we stood, holding our lights aloft in the doorway,